So now I'm going to move on to the second of our two presentations from evaluations, and that's an evaluation of Southwark Council's Summer 22 holiday activities and food programme with Leandro and Anita. I'll hand over to you, Leandro.
Thank you, Elizabeth. I will just share my screen and then Anita will start with the presentation. 1 second.
Hello everyone, my name's Anita. I work for Southwark Council as a holiday provision programme officer. So I support in distributing the funding and support providers in delivering the holiday activity, food and fun programme. And I'm here to present our stakeholder network analysis, which was one of our research outputs for evaluating the programme overall. I'm going to move over to the next slide. So just an outline of what we're going to discuss today in terms of, I'll give you some background regarding the holiday activity, food and fun programme, the need for why we did a stakeholder network analysis to begin with, and then Leandro will continue giving you the steps and tools that he used for the main outputs, and then it'll come back to me to give you lessons and reflective practices as me working for Southwark Council, but also being an embedded researcher for the first team. Thank you. So the Southwark Council Holiday Activity, Food and Fun programme. We may be aware that families are heightened and stressed due to the cost of living, especially during the holiday period. So the reaction from the Department for Education was to fund a holiday activity, food and fun programme. And this is provided during the longer periods of the holidays. So the Easter, the summer, and the winter school holidays. So we were not funding providers during the small half-term periods. The focus of the programme is to reach children aged between 4 to 16 years old, so that's reception right through secondary school, who are in receipt of benefit-related free school meals. Southwark Council, they received from Department for Education 1.5 million, and that's to cover all three within the academic year of the holiday periods. We fund places for children at holiday clubs, and they could be anything from schools, youth groups, church organisations and children's centres. And we designated funds across the whole of Southwark, especially within areas of high deprivation. So you may hear of it as food and fun programme, holiday activity, food and fun programme, but Southwark, it's known as the HAF programme. Next slide. So the aims and objectives of the HAF programme is that young people get to eat more healthily over the school holidays. So the Mayor of London Kitchen Social would produce take and make boxes. If you're not aware of what they're like the Hello Fresh, but then children would be able to go home with their parents and make meals. So we used to offer that. And during the programme, children are offered things like sandwiches, just food or hot food as well, especially during the winter programmes. We encourage our providers to engage in physical activity. So I was very fortunate to be part of the QA visits, our quality assurance visits, where I got to see young people doing sports, from tennis, from football, from netball. And if it was a provider that didn't have outdoor space, they were making use of their local parks and so forth outside to engage in physical activity. Not only did it focus on food as well as physical activity, but one of the objectives of the programme is that they engage in enriching activities that support their development in terms of resilience, in terms of character and their well-being. And one of the examples I could give is going to see an organisation where they're practicing mindfulness with the children or with the teenagers. Also to be safe and socially not isolated. And so with some of the research outputs where we got to do interviews, so one of the questions would be, if you weren't here, what would you be doing? most of the young people were reporting that they'll just be at home not doing anything or engaging in things that they shouldn't be engaging with. Having greater knowledge of health and nutrition, where our providers would not only do cooking classes, but also give that understanding of what healthy looks like, as well as being culturally appropriate in their delivery of their sessions, and to be more engaged with school and local services. So trying to provide a wraparound support. So in terms of the programme, for this to happen, the two questions that the first team were looking at was, what can local insights actually tell us about the impact and the implementation of the programme? And what opportunities can we do to improve the programme? So how best to look at local insights than to ask the service users themselves? So we had an array of different research methods that we used, from parent surveys to parent interviews, young people interviews. We also looked at attendance data, and our focus, what we're doing today, is the stakeholder network analysis. So why did we want to do a stakeholder analysis? We wanted to look at the impact on the food network overall and where the HAF programme sits within that, and how our providers actually interact with our local food offer and the network. And from that, we could see areas of maybe that we need to improve on, or any gaps within that food network. So for example, could it be that there's training and development that's needed for our providers? Could it be that we need to, are our resources up to date in where different food networks are? For example, food pantries, social supermarkets, because we also wanted to create that wraparound support. So not that just parents will actually send their children to a holiday programme, but we were providing a wraparound support. Another element of the stakeholder survey was to try and build a recommended supplier list. So our providers are providing food. Was there somewhere within the food network where, okay, this works best for this provider, maybe another provider who's struggling with a recommended supplier, we can actually start recommending suppliers to use and build up a list. So I will pass you on to Leandro, who will focus a lot more on the stakeholder analysis. Thank you.
Thank you, Anita. Hello, everyone. So I'm Leandro Garcia. I'm a lecturer at the Centre for Public Health at Queen's University Belfast, where I work with a range of methods related to systems thinking, complex systems, including network analysis. And in the next 2 or 3 slides, I will present the steps that we follow to conduct our stakeholder analysis and the outputs that we achieved, and explain a little bit also what a stakeholder network analysis actually means. So in the next slide, I have a representation of a network, right? So I have nodes, which are these circles, and we have edges represented by these arrows. And this could be a representation of any kind of network, right? So what we try to do in stakeholder network analysis is to use the methods and techniques used more widely in network analysis to investigate specifically networks of stakeholders. So in this case, each node would represent a specific stakeholder. And here we have different colors, perhaps representing different types of stakeholders, for instance. And each one of the arrows would then represent a type of relationship. And here we have dashed and full lines representing, for instance, 2 different types of relationships. And once we get a representation of the network after eliciting the relationships and the stakeholders, we can start asking questions like, how dense of relationships is the network? Are there isolated or poorly connected stakeholders? who are the hubs in this network? Perhaps that the identification of hubs might help us to identify certain actors that, for any reason, go out of the market. For instance, a supplier that goes out from the market could perhaps disturb a large amount of stakeholders and the network itself. What are the prevalent types of relationships? And this is, of course, a sample of the question we can ask ourselves. And if we imagine that this is a snapshot of the network at a given moment, and we take multiple snapshots over time, you can also see this network evolving. And we can think, as Anita mentioned before, of interventions that can increase the resilience of our network, for instance, to all sorts of disturbance, or for instance, bring to the network actors that might be isolated or poorly connected, for instance. So this kind of analysis help us to create a diagnosis, to inform actions to improve the network structure, so how to become more resilient, for instance, and functional, right? So how we improve the structure itself so that the flow, for instance, of information or of any other materials or goods are optimized in the network. So what are the steps then to conduct a stakeholder network analysis? So many of these steps are actually very similar to any other type of survey that we would conduct. So in our case, first we define the research question the questions in the survey. And these questions, of course, are defined also by the research question more broadly, and they would be very similar to other types of surveys that we conduct. So we would have questions about the attributes of the stakeholders responding to the survey, so the type of organization, the remit, etc., their size, for instance. And questions about the relationship. So each stakeholder responding to the survey would nominate and many times qualify the relationship. And by qualifying, we mean say aspects like for each one of the relationships, like the type of relationship they have, the frequency of the relationship, etc. Once we have the survey prepared, then there's the survey period. And the survey period, perhaps different from what we see in other surveys where we interview, let's say, households. It might contain one or more waves of sampling. So usually we would not know the full extension of the network that might be common in many situations. So we'll start what we call a seed sample composed by the institutions or people that we know are part of the network. And as they start to nominate new stakeholders, then we would continue to interview these new waves of stakeholders to have a fuller picture of the network itself. Once the survey is finalized, then there is the data analysis and report. So as you see, the steps are more or less the same as we do with any other surveys. There are some specificities because we're trying to capture network data. And of course, in terms of data analysis, there are specific approaches to analyze network data. There are specific softwares as well that can be used. Many of them are free to access, free to use. And those who are more interested in those more technical details, I'm happy to share them afterwards. In our case, we use online tool to collect the data. And this tool is called stakeholder.net. It's a tool that we developed here at Queen's University Belfast as part of an agreement that we have with the WHO European Office, who request us to create a network, a tool like that to collect data from partner countries across Europe. It is a free-to-use tool. So if you're interested, I left here the link. The slides will be shared or have been shared already. So you're welcome to try and use it. there will be very soon now in May training opportunities on how to use this specific tool. And again, if you're interested, contact me, and I'm happy to share the details of this tool on these training courses as well. Here I have a screenshot of what the questionnaire will look like for the participants. So on our left, we have questions that are very common, seeing other types of surveys. So for what holiday club do you work for? What's your name? And here in question number 3 is where this respondent starts to nominate their suppliers in this case. And here there is already a predefined list of suppliers that can be extended as respondents add suppliers that were not initially identified by us. And that extended list of suppliers then is going to be available for the next respondents. And here on question number 4, just an example of other kinds of questions we can ask, in this case, specifically about what kind of food opportunities or food are offered to the children and families attending that holiday club. So it's a mixture of questions about the relationships and questions that we normally see in surveys ask about the institutions themselves. So here I have 2 examples of outputs. Maybe it's not great to see. So here we have the geographic boundary of the Southwark Council, right, represented here. Each one of these nodes are either a half provider, a food supplier, or a service that the half programs signpost families to go for different services. And here, each one of these dots are geographically represented within the council. And you can see, for instance, in this case, which providers or which suppliers, each one of the half programs are using. Perhaps if they are using suppliers that are far away from them, why they're searching for food suppliers farther than the other options they could have close to them. We also can see, for instance, where perhaps programs might be less, the density of programs will be less than in other areas, or suppliers, for instance, etc. This is another way of visualizing the same kind of outputs, but in this case, each one of these dots represent either a half program or a supplier or another sign of services that the half program is signpost to. And here, there is no geographic data defining where the circles are positioned. It's much more in terms of helping to visualize the network itself. And here, the bigger the node, the more connected that node is with other elements in the network. So again, we can see here, for instance, that some perhaps food suppliers provide food to many more half programs than others. And perhaps, if there is a disturbance or something happens with that food supplier, we can see the possible knockoff effects on the network. So that's all I had to show right now. I will call Anita to speak about the lessons and uses and reflections. Over to you, Anita.
Yeah. Next slide. So in terms of reflections, so I think it was important for me to be an embedded researcher on the grounds at Southwark and also be liaising with the first team. So we would have weekly meetings and I'll be able to pass on any information to the team, especially with our providers in actually getting the survey completed. So one of the things that I noticed was the timings. With every research, you have deadlines, and I noticed that I'll give an example. When we had to distribute the survey, we distributed the survey on reflection at a bad time that wasn't convenient for the providers. And so we changed the way that we did that. And with research, you adapt as well. And so we changed that for the next holiday period in terms of making it part of our monitoring and evaluation, rather than the beginning of the programme. And we saw the difference in terms of responses. So where I had asked providers, please fill in this questionnaire, this survey, there was a low response because providers were focusing on actually getting the programme delivered and sorted, and coordinating and getting all their activities in order. But then there was a massive push when we did it again, at the end of the holiday period, as part of the monitoring and evaluation that we asked them for. So that was a good learning point and something that we will continue going forward when we need to retrieve information from our providers. Also, as embedded researcher, the development of the relationship I had as a programme officer with the actual providers, I think strengthened, especially relaying to them the importance of data. When we're working in the field of data and we understand the importance of data, it's not often those on the ground do understand that. So I had times where I was able to liaise with providers and explain to them, why are we asking for such information? Why are we having parent interviews? Why are we asking for the stakeholder analysis? And being able to connect the dots for the wider council objectives, especially under Southwark's sustainable food strategy. And I think being part of being on the ground at Southwark, as well as an embedded researcher, helped me strengthen that relationship with our providers and give them more depth and understanding to why are we asking for these things. As mentioned with the monitoring and evaluation, I gave an example of the timings into when we actually plan interviews, when we actually coordinate these surveys, and the deadlines that we want them to be received by. All of the things that we've done with our research outputs, not just the stakeholder analysis, has now been put into an implementation plan for delivery to actually improve the HAF programme. And so that's really good. And I'm now able to add timelines, strengthen our relationships with other food providers, and also build a recommended supplier for our providers, which actually gives them a lot more time to plan the programme itself rather than the other external things which they do struggle with. Capacity building, it was very, in our team, we are a small team that actually coordinates with the holiday activity food and fun programme. So me coming in post was a lot easier for them to deal with the business as usual, BAU side of things with the HAF programme, and then me working with the first team to ensure that the research outputs are done. And yes, challenges, as mentioned, because of capacity, juggling the two, I would say that it was interesting for me personally as an embedded researcher, because I felt like I was doing my dissertation all over again after how many years. So that was a really good thing. And I think it's something that we will be doing in the future, of using people, maybe residents, to become embedded researchers in programs as well, such as this. So yeah, I think that's me. Are there any questions?
Thanks both. That was again another really nice kind of presentation explaining, you know, how these evaluations are really kind of making a difference in practice. Again, I'll go first if that's okay. So I just wondered, Anita, if you could say a little bit more about how you were received in the local authority in terms of being embedded researcher. How does that kind of, or how does the embedded researcher model kind of fit with the local authority? Did you have to do a lot of work to make that accepted?
No, I think with the team that I'm in, research is their focus, evaluations. We commission programs, so midpoint reviews. One of the recommendations that actually came from the evaluation was having a centralized booking system. And that was something we were already working on. So it was really interesting for local authority to see that some of the recommendations are things that the team are already working on. So this just gave us even more rationale and evidence as that we were working towards our main objectives. And that also it fits in with the wider council strategies as well, in terms of tackling inequalities, who we are reaching, the accessibility of reach, and making sure that we reach the right target groups as well.
Yeah, so that alignment with the strategic goals of the organisation is important.
Yes.
Yeah. Any other questions there for Leandro or Anita? No, not seen anything pop up. So, oh, Tom.
Yeah, I'll ask a question. Anita, it strikes me there's some similarities here in terms of the impact with your embedded researcher approach, in terms of like working closely with providers, the staff, and generating reflective practice, and use of data and things like that. And it seems to be similarities there. I guess my question is for Leandro. How did because the social network analysis was really interesting. How did that analysis generate impact?
Thank you, Thomas. To be honest, I guess that's a better question for Anita, as she is the person bringing the results, connecting directly with the people locally. Anita, do you feel to be in position to answer that question probably better than me?
Yeah,
definitely.
Thomas, can you ask the question again?
I'm wondering how the social network analysis that helped generate impact.
I think with the social networking that we had, it was the communication with the providers was really important, and in terms of the timing. But it was, I think, I would say we had meetings. So we had meetings with our providers to actually explain about the future evaluation that we were going to do, so ahead of time. And I think that actually influenced the impact in them actually getting the work done, because it was, for providers, it was extra work for them. They would then have to find parents to actually fill in the survey, because we don't have the parents' details. So they would then have to find the young people that we would have to interview. So getting them to understand the reason we were asking for this information, and joining those links to, like I mentioned, the wider council objectives, and also pinpointing how it would be impactful for them as a provider. So if I give an example, the foods. So a lot of the providers had a problem in terms of their recommended suppliers. From our quality assurance visits as part of our business as usual, that had been fed back that they've had problems with food providers. And by doing something like this, we were able to actually navigate, this is a good provider, this is what people are using, this is the feedback that we've been getting. And then, as you can see with Leandro's analysis, the bigger the node, that's how more providers were beginning to use that recommended supplier, so be it, or signpost to this particular food bank. And as I mentioned earlier, it was also the wraparound support, which was one of our objectives. If I speak from the parent point of view, where in the evaluation as a whole, not many of them knew that the HAF program was somewhere where they could actually access wider support. And so if you go back to the network analysis and you look at how people are signposting, you also saw the differences with the amount of people that were not signposting, which then went back to the parents actually relaying back they didn't even know that they could be signposted. So that's where the impact, where we were able to match the dots. You found one element and then another element came in, if that makes sense.
I'm gonna have to draw that to a
Yeah.
close. We have got another question, but we're a bit over time now. So because I want to give enough time for the PAG discussion in a minute, if people do want to have a quick convenience break, by all means do go. But Marcia, did you want to ask your question anyway, and we'll perhaps have a brief answer to that? You're on mute.
Yeah, just a brief. Both our presentations were really interesting. This one and the smoking one. The thing I wanted to ask Anita and Garcia, I think Anita, what does success look like for you at this stage? I'm listening to when you say about the hubs, and you talk about the forums, and the fact is that you can get questions out there, which is really good. But what I thought about when we talked about the wraparound service, I thought that's wonderful. But for you as a researcher, at the stage that you're in now, what does success look like?
DFE continue their funding because it ends this year. That's what success looks like for us. But looking at
without the funding,
without the funding, so this evaluation has actually helped, and it's a piece of work that I'm working on now. If DFE do not continue the funding, what does HAF look like? What do we want HAF to look like? And that's what the evaluation has done, because we've had local insights and we've also got our strategic goals to meet. So that's what the evaluation has helped us to do, to prioritize. Yeah.
That's great, thanks. And I can see Chris has got your hand up. Again, we're going to go straight into the next session after this. So go ahead, Chris.
This was just a question from the chat, Liz. So the question in the chat to the team was, I wonder what have been the main hurdles of the stakeholder analysis and what the team would have done differently if they had to do it all again?
So we did do it again. Yeah, we actually did do it again. What I mentioned earlier was we got a low response the first time round that we did it. And after discussions with the providers, it was the timing. We had distributed it just before they started the holiday program. And anyone who knows when you're organizing something, that's the last, you're not even checking your emails. So the next time round that we did it, we incorporated it as part of the data collection that we do as business as usual. And then the response increased.
If I can add very quickly two things. One of them is that one thing that we also noticed in the first round is that some of the providers were reluctant to share what they see as strategic information. So once they visualize the potential for the uses of the outputs from the analysis, that also facilitated the engagement in the second wave. So that's another thing. And a third thing is, network analysis can be very technical as well. And there are lots of metrics that can be used, etc. So the other thing we need to be very careful is how to transform whatever comes out from the technical work in something that is in a language that's useful for those using that information at the end. So instead of having pages of technical numbers, etc., something that is perhaps simpler, but more people can engage, and do and act using that information.
Okay, thank you. Thank you to both sets of speakers for your presentations, and we look forward to looking at those evaluations in more detail. I guess if they're not published already, they will be soon, and we'll be able to see that.